right. So what's your name?
Austin.
Austin, and where do you live or where are you from?
I'm from Houston, live in Los Angeles.
Okay, very good. All right, so here's my question. What is the brain?
The brain is an organ that manipulates, controls, drives the body.
Okay, very good. And these words that you just spoke to me, where did those words come from?
They came from my mouth,
They came
technically.
from your mouth technically.
But
What about before that? What sent them to your mouth?
The brain probably sends a signal
Okay.
with it. Yeah.
Okay. And then what about the actual content, the language? Did you, so like, here's what I'm trying to get at. Did you come up with the words and then send them to your brain, which then sent them to the mouth?
I think the concept of you and the brain, like where's that line? It's hard to define.
What if I say there's no line? How would that make you feel? What if I say that, like, you're a brain?
I wouldn't be opposed to it.
You wouldn't be opposed to it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so what if I told you that every time you think you're being rational, that's a brain perception that's unreliable?
Yeah, it's inherently biased.
Okay, great. So bias is a great word. So bias can sometimes mean like influence. It can also refer to the little mechanisms by which we make decisions, by which we judge things, the little protocol that the brain sort of follows to judge things. And it's not a perfect protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this concept of cognitive biases, these unreliable mechanisms that are used every day to make decisions and that are then believed in. Okay, so have you heard of any cognitive biases?
Probably. I can't think about any off the top of my head.
Okay, so if you were a robot and I told you that there are some bugs in your software, or that maybe your software was written for a different environment, and in your current environment, your software isn't as good, it's not as appropriate, and I said we've identified a couple hundred bugs, relatively speaking bugs, would you be interested in learning what those bugs are?
Yeah.
You would? Okay. So, I mean, that's the situation. We know how human minds fuck up on a daily basis and don't realize it.
Yeah.
So you think you're going to maybe check that out?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, good. So if I gave you something to Google, you'd Google it?
Yeah.
And then I can tell the world and tell myself that I got one more person who's taking responsibility for the fact that they're making mistakes every day. They're interpreting things incorrectly, not drastically, not dramatically. But sometimes it's important to know about these errors to do just a little bit better when it counts.
For sure.
Okay. All right. Awesome, Austin.
Yeah.
All right. That's it. That's the interview. So I'm going to categorize you as self-aware because these are called self-awareness street interviews. And I'm finding out, do people think that they're souls in the ether hovering over these biological bodies? Or do they think that they are these biological bodies and so just as fallible and just as sort of imperfect as an evolved biological body would be? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, very cool. All right, really good talking to you.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, that's awesome. Thank you.
I unofficially love thinking about this. Like, it's
Good. All right. Oh boy. Okay. What's the difference between the mind and the brain?
The mind feels like a spirit. It's spiritual to me, personally. I'm not going to give you like a dictionary definition.
Sure.
And the brain is a muscle, nerves.
Okay, very good.
That's how I feel.
Could they be the same thing?
I think so in some contexts.
In some contexts?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, last thing. Do you think you make mistakes like on a daily basis or?
Me?
Yeah, weekly, monthly?
Daily.
Daily,
Yes.
okay. Are you gonna maybe after this conversation, tomorrow or something, I can give you something to look at to learn about some of these mistakes that we make every day?
Sure.
To learn about some of these mechanisms? Awesome.
I'm not mad at that.
All right, very good. Thank you, Courtnie. Oh, what country are you from?
That's a tough question. I'm Black American.
Very good. Excellent. All right, what's your name? Are you coming over? Boy. Okay, what are your names?
David.
And Esther.
Okay, nice to meet you, David and Esther. And which country are you from? What country?
USA.
Very good. And what did I tell you before we started the interview?
You wanted to understand whether we had a logical brain or more of a fallible, I guess, fluid brain.
Okay.
I don't know if I use the right exact terms, but
Yeah, so fallible meaning imperfect, capable of error. So which one do you think you are then?
probably more rational in that, like, yeah, I try to think through things before making decisions.
Yeah.
And I often, if I don't do that and I am more rash, I feel more regret.
Right.
If the decision is like something that doesn't necessarily make me happy.
Right. What about you?
I'd say I lean on that side too, same.
Yeah.
But I like to surround myself with people who aren't,
Okay.
because it keeps me like balanced.
Yeah.
Because I know that it's hard for me to go down.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So I get that you are rationally inclined, but are you rational? How do you judge your rationality? Do you spend time with it, and is that your measure of rationality? How long you spent on the decision? How many thoughts you had about it? How do you
I think
judge?
it's the way we perceive with our actions too.
Okay.
After we have those thoughts,
Okay.
it's very like structured. We have a structured way of thinking, and then we execute it in that same sort of
Yeah.
way.
Okay.
Say.
So you have a structured way of thinking. Okay, very cool.
Also
do you-
decision making too, because we
Yeah.
both have decision paralysis.
Okay.
That guides us our way through different problems.
So psychology has been researching how decision making happens. There are these things called heuristics. You know what heuristics are? Another term is mental shortcuts. So they're the little mechanisms by which we arrive at our decisions. So we've been studying them and looking at the ones that aren't super reliable. You heard of confirmation bias? Okay, can you tell me what that is? No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
It's basically hearing others sort of agree on some things, and because a bunch of people are agreeing on it, you kind of believe that was the right thing.
Okay, good. So that would be that could be a group thing,
Okay.
or it could be maybe a social proof mechanism. We tend to evaluate something according to how many of our fellow tribe mates like it. And then confirmation bias is our tendency to ignore evidence that contradicts what we think, and a tendency to hyperfixate on evidence, or really only see the evidence that's in line with what we think. Okay, so we've identified a bunch of these biases and heuristics and stuff, but you guys don't do those.
Oh no, definitely.
Oh, you do?
I think everyone has a little bit of bias in them, and for
Okay.
me, probably.
Yeah.
Especially if it's something that I actually really like want to believe is true.
Right.
Even though the rational part of me may say no, but like depending on how strong it is, I think there's a bit of that.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. That's all for my question. Awesome. All right, do you have any questions for me about anything we talked
What
about?
is the purpose of this, and what are you gathering from this?
So I've been reading about the mind and the brain for a long time, and so I've learned a lot about it, and I've developed a perspective that reflects the research, but doesn't reflect sort of what people tend to think about the mind and rationality. For instance, psychologists say that no, we're not rational. This what you guys are talking about, it's an illusion. And the only way you could even try to be rational, actually, not just trusting your impressions, whatever, but you'd have to learn the errors that you're making currently when you think you're being rational, and then be able to notice them when they happen. And so I'm trying to compare how brains see themselves versus what we understand about the brain.
Okay.
And the ultimate goal would be to inspire humility, to get people to realize that it's not rational. There are things that we can try to do to get a little bit closer to rational, but currently everybody here thinks they're rational, and then everybody disagrees with them. Is that right? So that's the goal.
And you say a lot of psychologists believe that we are not rational, or that we are.
So here's what happened. Economists wanted to study people, but they assumed that humans were rational.
Okay.
Okay? And we make fun of that, saying that they didn't study humans, they studied Homo economicus, okay, instead of Homo sapiens. All right, so then this guy, Daniel Kahneman, psychologist, comes along and he says, I think you guys have to rethink your whole model. That we make decisions in order to optimize utility, and that we are able to evaluate blah, 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 and that it isn't based on these heuristics, etc. instead. So he wins the Nobel Prize for that with this thing called prospect theory, a new model for decision making, and about risk aversion. Anyway, so what we realized, especially over the last 20 or 30 years, is that a lot of assumptions that we had about how reliable our mental mechanisms are false. So one thing that the public knows about is memory, for instance. You've probably heard that, oh, wait a minute, our memory isn't as reliable as we think that it is, right? Eyewitness testimony. So that's one that's made it into the public. You may have heard about the experiments with the hungry judges. So basically, they did an experiment, or they tracked judges, and they saw that judges were more lenient with sentencing after having had lunch. Right? Now we have this illusion that we're all rational, that judges are rational. No way what the food he has in his stomach would affect his brain performance, which is really dumb. But that's because we don't realize our brains. We think there were these souls, and anyway, so free will, things like that, all that stuff's being undermined now. And so I'm trying to see how that's going basically with the public. All right, here we go. All right, so, what's your name?
Balaji Gupta.
Okay, very good. Realizing the music. Let's just back up a little bit over here. Okay. I don't know that that's much better, but I feel a little more disconnected from the music.
No.
All right, that's good. So here's what I typically ask people. What are you, most specific?
You mean how I identify myself? I
Um,
typically say I'm an ophthalmologist. That's
Very good. Like, are you, let me ask you this, are you this whole body?
in that sense, yeah. I think the conventional thing is what I am in the body and what's contained inside the body. Yeah.
Okay. And then is there anything even more specific that you would want to localize yourself to?
In terms of consciousness or who?
Sure, perception, personality,
Right.
interpretation.
Yeah, all of that. It's the consciousness.
Okay. And then can you point to that?
No, it's not pointable.
It's not pointable?
Right. I mean, it's certainly, we can look at the neural substrate, and the neural substrate has to be in the brain.
Right.
But the brain is not.
For you, it's not sufficient.
Well, because if there's a body-brain connection, we certainly have. The brain is affected by the body, and the body's sending inputs.
You know what is interesting?
It's not separated. Yeah.
You know what's interesting is that the conversation just now was more about, as I understood it, the relationship between consciousness and brain. And then you sort of slid over to brain and body.
Right.
And when you made that slide, it made it sound to me like you're saying consciousness and brain are one and the same. But brain and body, and then you were talking about brain and body.
And actually, the whole system is actually a tripart system.
You think so?
Yeah, because the classic thing in the body, and because again, part of this is medicine training. We think about the heart and the stomach and the lungs and that. But then we have, I use the term scaffolding, which is all our extremities and our musculoskeletal system,
Sure.
our bones, and we know that even just posture can change how you're thinking.
Absolutely. But here's my question. Does it change how you're thinking by both affecting your consciousness and your brain? Or does it change where you're thinking by providing a different input to the brain, and that's enough of an explanation?
Yeah, so when you think of the brain, it's an artificial divide to say it's the brain. It's really the brain, the body, and really, if you want to supply it, there's the brain and the internal organs and everything, and then the musculoskeletal system, and they're very intertwined, more than most people realize.
Sure.
So the brain is not a disembodied brain.
No.
And so the consciousness rests within the body, if you want to say that.
Right.
The greater body. But the predominant driver is the brain, because it gets inputs from the body.
Right. Okay.
And those inputs are not just nervous inputs, but they're hormonal inputs.
Sure.
And chemical inputs. So there's all of that. Right.
And what if I said that the brain is embodied, It's made up of 100 billion neurons and 10 times as many glial cells as you mentioned yesterday. But you still want to apply consciousness to much more than the brain?
Well, we could sit there and say, if you want to say where is it driven from, it is the brain.
Okay.
I don't know if we have a separate consciousness within our gut, even though there's a neural system within our gut.
Right.
But we probably don't.
And if we did, it might not be us, though. It's just another cohabitat.
That's correct.
Right?
It would be a level of consciousness that's independent of what we think.
Right.
And so the brain,
Because a lot of ours is language, and language is definitely here.
well, right. So let's say that the conscious experience is created, and I'll grant you it's created in the brain, but I don't want to make it simplistic that the brain is apart from the body.
Right. Sure.
So
Absolutely.
that's fine. I will grant that.
All right. Very good.
That's fair.
So when I said yesterday, you asked me you were talking about consciousness, and I said I was an illusionist.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with illusionism?
Well, yeah. So I took you at your word in the sense that that you were there to you could fool people. It's like a magician, but not really. Mind reader, illusion.
I see.
As
Okay.
David Blaine. Or,
Let me. I explain that. So that deserves some explanation.
That was the
the original. Yeah.
And then you were just kind of saying, if who you are, your illusion. right. That you're ephemera. It's hard to really pin you down. Right?
Well, no. I want to explain it because illusionism basically says that consciousness is not a big mystery that we need to learn. We don't need to learn more about the brain in order to understand consciousness. The mystery of consciousness isn't because we're missing evidence. It's just that the evidence doesn't sit right with us. The explanation isn't intuitive to us. And so the brain has a trouble understanding how neurons could form a conscious system. But that's not the fault of the evidence. The evidence is all there. It's clear. It's just us that aren't satisfied with that explanation.
Okay, but I like, and you understand that. With the explanation.
No, it still isn't intuitive for me.
Right. Okay.
But basically, here's my understanding of consciousness. First of all, impossible to have a processing system that isn't conscious. Okay? Because for me, consciousness is awareness or processing, the act of processing.
Well, so then you attribute all animals with the consciousness.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's fair enough to say.
Yeah.
You have, but there may be. What about like an Apple? A small Apple computer. It has a processor.
Yeah.
It's probably not conscious.
Right. And so
there has to be some thresholding of consciousness.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I
think I would kind of say
you could
that it is conscious of, for instance, the image that it's processing, but it's about how much unity there is in the processing, how much integration there is.
Or how we describe what consciousness is.
Yeah, there's that as well, yeah.
We tend to think of consciousness as some sort of self-referential I.
Right.
But there could be conscious experience without the I-ness.
That's interesting. Helen Keller would fall into that. Before she learned language, she had no concept of self.
Right.
But of course, she was still processing experience.
Right.
Okay.
That would be, but a dog, but who knows? A dog could have a conscious.
I mean, I think that dog has to probably. I don't, because the thinking is that we evolved a sense of self because we are these social beings, and so we need to.
But dogs come from packs, and
it's possible. It's possible.
They have hierarchies and all that. Kind
of
stuff too. But I think the sapient is that we're aware and I'm not sure the dog is aware of that.
Yeah.
The dog may have some awareness, but we don't know. We have no way of knowing if it's self.
What it's like to be a bat or Chewy.
Right. Classic.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So
anyway,
here's my last question.
I'm sorry. I'm really beating around the bush, but it's
no.
a complicated question.
It is.
So,
they are.
I know you want the more complicated answer.
Yes.
So anyway, go ahead. What's your
I want the raw data, the raw thoughts, and
Right.
I like it messy. So here's my question for you. You aren't very hopeful, it seems, about in the next few decades there being a dramatic shift in the educated humans regarding critical thinking, that they'd be able to think better if they learn about how their mechanisms work?
I think we're limited.
We're definitely limited, but do
Right.
you think that we could
Make better
improve?
decisions?
Yeah.
I mean, I rest with Danny Kahneman. I'm human. I don't think I can improve beyond. I mean, there's certainly better decisions you can make. I mean, he's wrong in the sense that there's no hope.
You know, Danny Kahneman had a lot of hope.
Right,
Like he made the point that he's still going to do a lot of these things.
But you can't eliminate it.
Right, we can't eliminate it. But when we are able to talk about it, when System 2 knows about System 1, right, is aware
You
of
can make better decisions.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I think we can make better decisions. The question is the vast majority of people going down that? There's a lot of intelligent people. I mean, that his book was on the bestseller list, which is shocking.
You know, it's amazing. I've met 100 people who've heard of the book, about 3 who have read it.
Okay, and there you go. But so fair enough. So, and I took notes on it. I read it twice.
Good, excellent,
And even
excellent.
then, I'm grappling with parts that I don't know.
Of course.
In fact, one of the things I would like is that whole thing in psychology, which it's a crisis of reproducibility. And, it's the basic stuff.
Priming was very difficult. They couldn't replicate priming
And
stuff.
so that's exactly it. And that was early in the book. That was a big one.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted him to rewrite it before he died.
Yeah.
Saying, well, look, let me throw out stuff that maybe the numbers aren't right.
Yeah.
And which is always a problem in the skepticism of psychology when you are someone like a scientist like I am. It's always a little wishy-washy side. And all of them are done undergraduate of 100 or whatever.
Yeah.
They're always small numbers. And I'm like, I don't know if you can universalize all this, And the stakes are often so small, like, I'll give you $1 or whatever. I mean, all of it. And Kahneman was aware of it. I mean, Kahneman,
Yeah.
So,
Peace upon his soul.
right. No. I respect him.
Absolutely.
No disrespect. But it's that the issue of so can we make, I mean, it's the same thing like with finance, with everything. Let's extend the argument. Can we educate people to be better? And the best argument against this was this whole vignette I heard on one of the podcasts. It was about this one hospital that did this work on trying to make physicians wash their hands. And they had all these different things. And then finally they did this thing where every time you turn on the computer, there's a picture of a palm, those germ things.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone every time saw that when that was a login screen.
Okay.
And then they just found the rates were increasing.
Nice. Yes.
And then he goes, now think about this. These are some of the most educated people in the world. They all obviously know germ theory. And
Right.
They all are, and we know that there's hospital infections caused by it.
Right.
And yet it's so hard to have them wash their hands all
Right,
the
but
time.
you're talking about they know facts.
Right.
What they don't know is that we're not rational and need systems like that.
Right.
So this reminds me of... Oh, sorry, you didn't get to your point. Go ahead.
So that education is not necessarily a panacea. And if you think of so many things, this is a problem, let's educate people. Oh, they're overweight, let's educate them on calories. Oh, there's tobacco, let's put warning signs on it.
Right.
There's
But
financial
I'm talking
things
about the underlying thing.
And you're talking...
I'm talking about the
the
interpretations,
critical
right?
and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. And so, I get it. We've always made the wrong mistake.
Yeah.
We haven't even taught people how to think the right way.
And-
Which is a
and-
critical thinking question.
And we're not even aware of how many mistakes we're making. Like, if we could just crack the door open a little bit, say, hey, guys, here's what it looks like inside. You're not this rational soul hovering above or inside of your body. You are this biological being with the same mechanisms as your ancestors who did not evolve to vote correctly or to know how to do taxes or anything like that.
So yeah.
Let me tell you about another thing about doctors. So because we're arrogant and we think we're rational and we think if we're educated and we always do things correctly, you had these doctors, sometimes they'd leave a scalpel in a patient. I'm talking about 150 years ago. And it still happens. But and then one hospital introduced this idea that you have to do a checklist before you close up, right? And all the doctors were refusing. Oh, I don't need that. And then all of a sudden, when they did it, So if we can just, we don't have to get people to understand.
Okay, so do you buy into checklist medicine?
Okay, so I think that a lot of nuance can be lost.
There you go.
A lot of
Well,
sort of system one advantages can be lost.
There's situations where checklist is useful.
Yeah.
There's other situations where it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And
right.
the problem is the systems don't know how to apply it properly.
Right.
So
we're still figuring that out. Yeah.
Exactly. It's messy.
It's messy. I like messy though because that's how we get a little cleaner, right?
We are better.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. I use the checklist all the time.
Yeah.
And I following the algorithm is often better, but the algorithm keeps changing, and you want to always make it better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like they ossify into bureaucracies where people are just doing it just to do it to check off the box.
Yeah, and then they're not even taking it seriously anymore. I had a girlfriend who was a doctor, and she hated doing all of these write-ups and these checklists and so on. And it wasn't until like she made some mistake with something that all of a sudden she looked at them differently. Some of them she was like, okay. Other ones she was like, no, that's still
right.
Yeah. But all right, this has been awesome, Balaji. Thank you so much. And I'll see you again, right, this evening. But thank you so much for chatting.
We will definitely interact. The world is
Very
small
good.
enough.
Excellent. All right.
So good. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Balaji. Good morning. Something I realized today, thinking about that last interview, today's 2025 Akbar 26 Aldi. And something I was thinking about is that I get why he was talking about the brain and the body, saying that he didn't want to localize. I got distracted by something. Yeah, localized consciousness to the brain. Because I thought he was talking about a consciousness and body connection. But no, he was talking about, well, what he said. I still don't think that that's the case. I think consciousness can be fairly localized to the brain. I mean, fairly, like, justifiably.